Welcome, friends. Welcome on the barricades. On today's edition, we are going to discuss about something very important: Russia, the protests, the situation, and we have a very interesting guest today. He is a professor. He teaches philosophy at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Sofia, and his name is Todor Todorov. He's also a journalist, and he's well known for the public for his intervention on political issues, international affairs, and stuff like that. Thank you for coming, Todor Todorov.
Thank you. Nice to be your
First
guest.
time I'm not butchering our guest's name. So, okay, and we also have with us Boyan Stanislavski as usual. Thank you for being here with us, Boyan.
Glad to be here.
And you two have an important advantage. I know that Bulgarian, the language, it's very close to Russian, and you can read the Russian press, and that puts you in a privileged position in terms of access to information. Unfortunately, in Romania, as I told Boyan and our viewers many times, the situation is not the same. This language barrier creates also an informational barrier that keeps us in the dark about the most important issues and most important problems related to Russian politics. Of course, we are here to discuss the protests. We are here to discuss Alexei Navalny and his very interesting adventures that somehow resembles a Russian novel because it has so many interesting elements. And we are here to discuss from a rational perspective and try to avoid the pitfalls of trying to take sides or to give ultimate solution to complicated situations. So before starting the first part of our show, as I explained to our guests prior to our meeting, I would like us to discuss some things in general about Russia and the current situation, just to have some context. Because right now we have pictures, we have messages, we have recordings from the protests, but this comes in a we have abundance of information, but at the same time we have a very disturbing lack of information regarding to Russia and what is happening there and what has happened in the past 30 years. So without further ado, I would ask both of you, first if Todor wants to go and then Boyan, to tell me some things about the economic situation in Russia in the past 3 decades.
Well, it's no secret that Russia is experiencing a economic downturn for some time already, and the situation changed dramatically since the time Putin came to power in 2000, when economy doubled and the people experienced, a better living standard, etc. But that was a long time ago already. So now, what the people are saying in Russia is that apart from having these economic difficulties that are more than apparent, the lives of people have been affected. There is a kind of a gap between the power, between the government and the people, especially the younger generations of Russians, who are people getting information from the new media, from the internet, from social networks, from channels that are not easy to control, that are not easy to silence. And that is why you have this phenomenon that the younger people, the younger generation, let's call them the Instagram or TikTok generation, they don't want to be affiliated with Putin in any way. So this gap that you see in Russia, the gap between the power and the people, which is also a cultural and generational gap, is an unavoidable crisis for Putin. And because your question was more general, how the economic season, well, it's looking pretty bad. And that's why Putin looked for a strategy to reestablish his symbolic authority, which was which was maybe the main effect of his campaign in Ukraine, in Crimea, because after Crimea, 2014, let's just bring back a little bit history. In 2013, Navalny was already challenging Putin, and he took part in the mayor's election in Moscow. He got 24%, I think, which is not few. And when Putin made his campaign in Crimea, symbolically he became very, a hero again. So it was a very, very important move he did, because, well, let me put it this way: when we talk about Navalny's challenge against Putin in this situation, we must keep in mind that Navalny, at least this is my opinions, my position, Navalny is not and cannot be a political, neither ideological challenge to Putin. But he is a very strong symbolic challenge to Putin's authority. And what he does right now, maybe we'll comment on that more in detail later, but what he does right now and what he's been trying to do the last decades is putting Putin in a check situation. And okay, it's not a checkmate yet, but it is a check situation, which is pretty serious, because what you can do in a situation like this, from a pure chess perspective, when you are in a check, you can either move with the king, which is a good strategy, I think. What maybe what he did in 2014 with Crimea, or try to impede the attack, what he's doing right now, putting Navalny in jail. But it's a very risky move, I think, because if the resentment threshold is already topped, and I think nobody can really calculate if the resentment against Putin, that means the people having tough lives, experiencing this economic downturn, and then seeing this film about the palace and everything, this special topic of corruption, I'll leave that for later, is risky, because if the threshold is not topped, then maybe the whole thing can be silenced and the crisis can be overcome. But if the threshold is already, gone too far, is already topped, then it may be a very big, unavoidable crisis. And maybe the last thing I want to say is starting talk is that I think what Russia is experiencing or starting to experience right now is very close to what we have in Bulgaria. What I mean is the power, the government is obviously in crisis, a very strong symbolic crisis, but there is no political alternative. There is nobody who can really challenge or take the power from Putin. I mean, we had in Bulgaria huge protests last summer, and for some time there's been this, anger against the government building up, but still there is no real alternative to the people in government. And in Russia we have the same, which is a deep symbolic crisis of power, what we experience.
Thank you very much for your take. Now, Boyan, I would like you to comment on the situation, and I would like you to emphasize this economic history, if you could refer to it in just a few words, and because I think we have to take this into consideration besides all the propaganda and all what's being told. Let's stick to the numbers and how the situation evolved economically in Russia.
Okay, so let me make it interesting here and disagree with pretty much everything that I heard so far. Now, you want me to start with the economy? That's fine. Like, I don't have all the statistical data right in front of me right now, but I definitely share the view that the biggest growth, the biggest upswing, economically speaking, happened in the beginning of the century. But and then the situation started to get more nuanced and complicated, but not necessarily downturn. A major downturn really occurred around 2009 and then around 2015, and in between that period, things were relatively good. And now we have a major downturn, another one related to the question of the pandemics, or at least that's the data that I know. Why did it become difficult later on? Well, it became difficult because people aren't aware of that. I mean, not our guest. I'm just saying that in general, the public opinion is not aware of that. That in the 90s, which is the last decade of the previous century, Russia lived through, and there's another thing similar to Bulgaria, because you mentioned that there are similarities with Bulgaria. Russia experienced a major civilizational disaster, okay? I mean, all the pathologies that were basically overcome in terms of social life, economic life, and so on, so cultural life, if you like. All these pathologies that were overcome in the early years of the Soviet Union, they came back, okay, and they struck with a vengeance. So we had hunger, we had poverty, we had like all kinds of things that you can imagine in the kind of poor capitalist colonial to a large extent country. So then when things started to improve a little bit in the beginning of Putin taking over power, okay, in the first years of the current century, then obviously the upswing was very big because, for example, and that's just one example of many, they started collecting taxes. They finally started doing that. So obviously, the first upswing was very big, and that's because of the comparison, okay, that we had. Like the basis was the bar was very, very low in the 90s. That's why. But then it doesn't mean that the model that was imposed or have been or was being imposed at the time by Putin was not being effective. It was being effective, but of course the later stages were a little less spectacular. Now, the second thing on the question of that's what I remember. Okay, I didn't take notes, and you made many points, so perhaps like you might want to remind me later on if I.
No, just like to make a short point here, because I read about it and I could not have imagined had I not read it. I mean, in Russia, it was difficult in the 90s even to go to store to buy bread. I mean, people were not getting their salaries. The shock doctrine that was imposed on them with such, I would say, they were either stupid or either extremely cynical. I mean, the ones that came, like the new Chicago boys that came to, the counselors of Gorbachev and later on the Yeltsin. Yeah. So they came up with this idea of the shock doctrine that literally threw the country into chaos. I mean, and people were desperate at that time. And at the same time, they had this idea of loans per shares, and I'm sure that the viewers don't know what that means. It means that it was a system that gave the possibility of insiders of buying the main factories and the main state institutions, and to become, this is how the oligarchs and the oligarchy class was created. Okay, so this is why I think you say that the bar was so low. I mean, people were so desperate that when Putin came, they agreed maybe to indulge some of his authoritarianism or other things because they were quite desperate.
Let me just stop you right here, okay? I'm sorry, because this is an important point to make also. Look, I don't like authoritarianism, and I don't like authoritarian tendencies, but on the other hand, I don't like abstracting myself from the history and the reality. Authoritarian regimes in Russia in terms of its history, are the norm. Okay, so don't tell me that it's some kind of accident, okay, or incident in terms of. So I don't like it, and I think it has to be changed, and it requires a thoughtful intervention on the part of the society in order to make it. But you will not think about authoritarianism or democracy on empty stomach. And that's like, there's plenty of historical examples about that. So first, the people had to be fed. And in terms of, supplying economical stabilization, not necessarily, some super well-being, but some kind of economical stabilization, stabilization that allows some kind of social life, social expansion, cultural and civilizational stability, that was provided. And now, regardless of what you think about Putin, his authoritarian tendencies and his conservative ideas and so on and so forth, he managed mostly through nationalizing part of the heavy industry, renationalizing part of the heavy industry, to stabilize the economy, and even to, like in the beginning of the century in particular, to plan it to a certain extent. But of course, like by that, I'm not trying to say that it's any kind of planned economy. What they're having in Russia is some kind of state-managed capitalism, and in a very peculiar manner, okay? Because there are these oligarchs that have to be brought under the thumb at some point in order for them to stop stealing all the time, all right? And this is a very weird system, okay, where you have this ladder of oligarchs, and on top of that, you have, like, Putin and some other powerful people. And through the institutions of the state, they control these oligarchs to a certain extent, of course, but they control them in order for them not to get out of hand completely and to mess it all up. And and oftentimes it just happens so that with the private funds of these oligarchs, through Putin and through state institutions, the pressure that is put on them, on those oligarchs, certain services are provided, for example, in some areas or towns and stuff like that, which is a complete, it's not, when you think about Russia's economy, by far, of course, it's a capitalist economy, but it's got certain peculiarities which are not, typical or do not occur in the West or in the capitalist economies that we know of or that we normally think of when we say capitalist economy. Okay, so that's one thing. But second thing I want to say, which I think is very important here, or like two things really, is about the symbolic power of Putin. Look, I mean, of course, Putin has to make some kind of gestures in terms of symbolic rituals, pretty much as every person in power. Okay, in Russia, I think culturally speaking, that could be a little bit more important, but it's not that his symbolic power is in any way endangered. And definitely, I don't agree with the thesis that the Crimea, the annexation of Crimea, had anything to do with the internal political process of Russia. What I would say is that it was an act of defense, because had Russia not annexed Crimea, it would have become a NATO base, and no sovereign state, particularly Russia, would have ever allowed this kind of thing to happen. If you kind of look at the the map in the Black Sea and so on and so forth, and there are already NATO bases, particularly American bases in Central Asia and Caucasus. So and symbolic power, I don't think his symbolic power is endangered in any way. Of course, I totally agree with the fact, and here I strongly agree, that there's a major generational gap and cultural gap maybe between the younger people and Putin and his surroundings, so to say. Now, but still, there's one element that has to be said here, that the gap used to be bigger in the past. Like, for example, in 2005 or 2007, you hardly met any young person around in their 20s or something like that that would have, even thought of supporting Putin. Now it's changed. There still is a generational gap, but more people support Putin now, and they support him not because they like him, but because there's so much attack on Russia in the mainstream media in the West, and and in general by Washington and European Union.
This is very interesting, because this is what I feel, they're just with this constant attack that I see here. And in Romania, I told Todor just before that it is ludicrous. I mean, we literally have like 5 to 10 public intellectuals that write an article a week on how bad Russia is. And this is just playing in a very perverse way into the hands of Putin and somehow supporting him, because this is what you get when you have such violent reaction and such propaganda is very perverse. You can turn against you at you don't know when, but it will be a time when you could find yourself in a very difficult situation because you managed to lead this propaganda campaign. Now, that I think, and seeing you two talk, I think we should need a separate, show just to discuss the situation and the economic situation, the history, because it's very complicated. But I would like us now to go to the main political powers there, because I think if you go, especially in Romania, on the street and you ask people what are the political parties in Russia, even though we have people that write about Russia like on a weekly basis, they would probably say, oh, there is the party of Putin and this is it. And I don't think they even know that the name is Russia United or something like that. So let us explain for our viewers what are the main and the leading political forces right now. Would you like to go first, Todor?
Okay, I just want to make one quick remark on what Boyan said a few moments ago. I agree that Putin's measures on economy, this very special kind of model that he imposed, dealing with the oligarchy and everything, which happened at the beginning of the century, was a success. But it was coping with the problems of the 90s. It was because Putin inherited and almost destroyed Russian state symbolically and economically after Yeltsin, and it was very important that he deals with this oligarchy and that he restores the symbolic significance and power of Russia on the international stage, and he did both of them. But that was the 90s. We live now in the 2020s. It's like 30 years after. So you cannot rest upon the same model or the same reality, because reality changed. The global economic reality changed, and the Russian economic reality changed. So I don't think Putin is able to respond to what's going on now. So that is what I mean when I say that he experiences a crisis of, domestic management, and that there is a growing resentment across Russia, because I've been to Russia. I remember a huge conference I visited in Moscow 1 or 2 years ago. So I remember what they told me then, how people really, what they think about the power in Russia, and the very bad situation they found themselves in. But what was even more interesting, because you ask about the political players, and I totally agree with you, Maria, that especially in the Western media, but also in Bulgarian media, and I guess also Romanian media, Russia is always explained in a very simplistic manner, so as to match the categories of Western imagination. So let's say you present Navalny as some kind of a liberal, democratic hero or something like that, which he is not. And if you really understand Navalny's political ticket, he ran on a very strong nationalistic, even one might say xenophobic ticket in 2013, when he wanted to expel all the Georgians from Russia, and he had a program of restricting the immigration of Muslims to Russia, and all kinds of stuff like that. He took part in this Russian march with all kinds of right wingers, and you don't have to forget that. You don't have to idealize Navalny as the kind of there is the Navalny image in the Western media imagination, this lovely romantic person, and there is the reality, the nationalist, who is very well aware that probably the only ideological agenda that could somehow beat or challenge Putin in Russia is the nationalist agenda. And what he did now is that he shifted his program or his strategy, let's say, because his nationalist agenda drew away many of the younger urban population, and it was a problem for his popularity in Russia. So now he tries something which is, I think, very, very smart, and this is the corruption critique, because this is a very sensitive feature. This is something that a kind of an unwritten pact between Putin and the Russians, because corruption was it was part of the deal. And when we talk about the situation in Russia, and also I will come to the political players, I just want to go on a little bit with this analysis. When you think of a situation in Russia, and you keep in mind, it's not only economy. It's not only the economical difficulties or the situation, the political situation. It's the emergence of a specific ideology that arose in Russia, which makes this equation between Putin and Russia and the Russian national interests. So if you are opposing Putin, you are a national betrayer. You are betraying the fatherland. There was this kind of a game that Putin played ideologically, and it was successful for some time. And I don't say that he invaded Ukraine so that he reestablishes his authority, but it was one of the side effects of his actions. I know why he did that, and we can. And we must think it thoroughly and more seriously, because it's a very complex situation. In the Western media, it's always presented very simplistically, but the Russian reality is very complex. And I don't want to talk about Ukraine now, if he had to do that or not. But one of the effects of what he did was that he reestablished his symbolic significance in the Russian imagination, which is pretty important. And the other important thing is overcoming this ideological or imaginatory, coincidence between Putin and the idea of the fatherland. Putin presenting him as a kind of a new Stalin or something. And let me come back to your question about who the political players are. Well, the people in the West are not very familiar with the political stage in Russia. There are lots of smaller or bigger parties and players, but I would stick to the answer that for now the only real agent of politics remains Putin, and the other players who try challenging him or try to present. And because you wanted us to talk about the Communist Party. I have a specific impression of how they performed, which was not a good impression, I should admit, because when I attended this conference in Moscow 2 years ago, and it was it was hosted by Russia Today, and there was this first panel including Nikita Mikhalkov, so you had a huge media presence there, and they invited me also to take part in this panel. And another guy they invited was Zyuganov, who didn't show up. He didn't show up. Instead, he sent his deputy to come, and his deputy didn't want to take part in the panel. He said, I first want to hear what the others say, and then maybe I will comment. And what the topic was, the topic of the conference was the 100 years from the October Revolution. And there is ideological agenda now in Russia. This is Putin's agenda, try to somehow put aside this revolutionary idea and everything. And so it was a challenge. And this deputy guy, I don't remember his name, sorry, one of the deputies of Zyuganov, he didn't want to stand in front and speak. And in the second panel, he was given the chance to talk, and then he started explaining or even, defending the October Revolution from the point of view of the Communist Party, which is a total absurd to happen today. So what I saw was a kind of being unable to to present yourself. So I don't know what part they are really playing, and if their agenda is adequate to what you might call a modern leftist or even like a communist radical party. I don't believe they are. I believe they stick more to a nationalist agenda, and nostalgia is a resource of politics, and that's why I think it's. That's why I made this comparison with Bulgaria, because you experience some kind of crisis of power, but still you don't have a real contender, neither in political terms as a party or as a personal figure, nor in ideological perspective. Someone who might say, okay, I have a different agenda, I have different politics to offer. No, all the other players, they are minor, and until Putin is on top, it will be very difficult to construct a somewhat different political stage. Of course, Russia never had democracy. It's a historical fact, I agree, especially that kind of liberal democracy that we cherish so much in the West. They sorry?
We still don't have it, despite.
Yeah, we still don't have it. Yeah, sure, we still don't have it. But it's a different topic. Let's not go into that. The thing is that the West, the media in the West imagines that it will be possible to somehow remove Putin and put someone, a liberal Democrat, and the things Russia becomes something like, I don't know, like Germany or like France. No, it won't. It won't be that easy. It's a civilizational and cultural process. And what struck me very strong when I was in Russia is the way the intellectuals there talk about their situation, because they have this very strong perception of being a civilization on their own with a historical mission, a little bit like the Jewish. This is the Russia of God and so on. So they speak about a kind of a conflict of evolutionary projects, which of course also deal with cultural and political development of civilization. So they perceive of themselves as a kind of a other civilizational project. You can't deal with that by just imposing concepts of Western political experience, liberal democracy, etc. It doesn't work like that. You have to go deep and see how Russian political life is constructed, what is its real life, and what could be a real challenge to Putin's establishment.
This is so interesting. Thank you so much, because I really feel like this is a discussion I'm waiting for a long time, because I told you I don't know much about what's going on. I mean, I read, but I still feel like there is this, glass between me and what's happening there.
That's the Western spectacles. That's what you see through, and that's a very big problem. And that's
frustrating, because I have my intuition, and I always said something's not right here, And I think it's the first debate, where people don't feel obliged just to say all the time Putin is bad. Okay, I get it. Now let's move on and let's discuss things in a more nuanced way. So please, Boyan, do you agree that it is very difficult to find right now an alternative? And what do you think about the political players right now? Where do you see a ray of hope of changing things, of continuing in the same way but with a more, I don't know, open-minded or more progressive contestant?
Right. Look, so many points have been made. There's no way for me to probably even remember all of them. But there are some things which I definitely want to comment on. Now, first, the question of the Western spectacles that Russia is explained through. I think this is the major bankruptcy. Okay, one of the major bankruptcies of the Western media and the Western elites and Western intellectuals, because that's how they want to see Russia. They just think, because they are extremely supremacist, they think that everything which happens in the West, or in America for that matter, like in Western Europe, I mean, or in America for that matter, that's the model. And that's the best model. And there is, you know, there could be some nuances, but this is how the world should look like if everybody's supposed to be happy. Whatever the human rights should be, kind of implemented, and so on and so forth. Now, this is not the case, and obviously, like anyone that scratches a little bit, underneath the surface of this picturing of Russia, and not only of Russia, because it applies to China, it applies to Turkey to a certain extent, it applies to India, it applies to Brazil. Okay, so it's not like it's in this respect that it's a special attitude to Russia. Russia gets it from the Western media and from the Western establishment because it's independent, okay, and it's independent in a very ostentatious manner. It's demonstrating its independence, and the fact that it's not going to follow certain models and so on and so forth. Now, and also even the question, okay, the question invented in a certain way is Putin bad, okay, or I mean, you said it's something like, well, Putin is bad, we can move on, and said, well, the thing is, Putin is bad in comparison to whom? That's, that's the kind of nuanced way to put the question, because, political leaders are bad, particularly political leaders of superpowers. Okay, they are often corrupt, and they've got all kinds of, things. But this is how you look at the question, in my opinion, if you want to have some kind of meaningful rational analysis. Because you can say that Putin is bad because there are some authoritarian tendencies, and for example, he supported some ultra-conservative measures, okay, regarding, for example, gay people and stuff like that. But on the other hand, he didn't start 8 wars like the last 3 American presidents. So, it makes sense to have this kind of sense of proportion and to have this balance. So that's one thing. Second, on the question of like political challenges of the Putin's model. Now, I totally agree with you. What you, Todor, said in the first part and in the second part, if I could say so, of your intervention. But you see, this is not a crisis for Putin. Like, this is not a crisis for him, because he still enjoys a lot of authority. Okay, I mean, of course, now it's decreasing. It's decreasing mostly. Well, I can go back to the factors why I think it's decreasing, but it's decreasing not because of him as a person, but it's decreasing because the model that he imposed, this kind of oligarchic management, is obviously, losing momentum. I mean, it was a good model, I think, a good idea to put things back together, but now there's the question of how are you going to develop it, okay? And with this kind of semi-feudal oligarchic, top-down control, it's going to be very difficult, okay? And I've heard, Putin and other people, important politicians in Russia calling for a debate now about what kind of Russia do we want, because now we have put it together. And I've been to Russia also many times to conferences and just visiting friends, plus I followed Russian media, and I've seen this debate, and up until now there is no conclusion. There is just well, maybe that way, maybe another way. And the problem here, the very important problem, is that actually, you might think of an ideological alternative here and there, and you could discuss whether the Communist Party of the Russian Federation presents that or not. But this is just one thing. And then there is the other thing, like, who is actually going to implement it? And this is the big question, because Putin, like, regardless again of what you think about his political views, he is a very able man, a statesman and a politician. He's done, a lot, and through everything that he has done, he has earned a place in the Russian history for sure, okay, because he prevented the total fall apart of the Russian state. So, and now this is a very challenging task, and of course, it's very difficult to find an exceptional cater today to just replace him and for things to go. So there is this danger that things are gonna switch back to normal, okay, which is to the kind of model that started off in the 90s, or there is another danger that someone even stronger in terms of his authoritarian charisma could come than Putin, okay? And by the way, I think that this is exactly what would have happened had any Alexei Navalny or anyone won but by any that's not possible. But as he won, for example, and I don't know, toppled the Russian government, and he would have been there maybe for like 2 years, okay, and then there would be someone else coming, kind of, Putin on steroids and stuff like that, that would really, turn Russia into some kind of, military dictatorship or something like that, which we don't want. No one wants that. So the question for Putin and the question for the Russian society is also how to now make the change. How do you reform this? Now, it's also another question whether it is reformable, okay? Because now this model also has a history. We don't have the time to talk about it right now, but there are some very important historical premises that made it like this, okay? That it looks like this top-down oligarchic ladder. So I don't know how things are going to go, but I don't think that there's that this extension of Putin's ability to be the president by the changes in the constitution is necessarily something that he does because he would have loved to die in power like Brezhnev or something like that. I don't believe that's the case. It's just that there is no other way, I'm afraid, for the moment. And they probably keep thinking, they probably keep scratching their heads. I don't know what's going to happen. And it's very difficult to say. Now, the question of opposition, because I think this is very important when we mention Navalny, okay? Navalny is normally presented as some opposition leader. He is opposition leader, my, right? There is no meaningful opposition that he's leading, okay? The biggest opposition party, Todor mentioned that, is the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Now, I have not been on the conference that you mentioned. I think it's very weird what happened there. But I also don't think that we can base ourselves just on one anecdote and extrapolate it and to make it become our opinion about the whole party. Now, I have my experience, for example, with the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is relatively good because I've attended, for example, the protests that they have organized against the pension reform. I think it was 2000, was it 17 or 18? I can't remember. Sorry, a couple of years ago.
I know that you did that. Let me just go back. I'm pretty sure our viewers don't know that. So what went good, let's say, from what I read, was that 60% of the oil reserves are owned by the state, and more than 90% of the gas reserves are owned by the state. And that alone, that measures that he took made him able to support the social society, healthcare, schools, pensions, and so on and so forth. Now, the bad thing, from what I've read, is that they have a flat tax of 13%, and that was introduced in 2001, unfortunately, because prior to that they had progressive taxation, and they also don't have a tax on wealth, and wealth is concentrated right now. Or a study from Piketty showed that the Russians that stashed wealth outside Russia, the wealth that was stashed there is equal to the one that is in the country, and this is very problematic. At the same time, it seems like this type of system that he managed to put together started to fail, and this is very interesting. So you were on a protest to a measure regarding pensions, that is, he wanted to make the age of retirement higher, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And
you protested Putin, if anyone asks. And you were not beaten, not tortured. You were allowed to protest. Interesting.
No, thank God. No, nothing like that. So I just attended this protest, and I took pictures, and then because I was a journalist at the time. I mean, I still am a journalist, but at the time I was more active in terms of international correspondence and stuff. So look, so I just wanted to say this. I just mentioned this just to kind of balance the view that was presented by Todor. For example, my experience with the Communist Party of the Russian Federation was a pretty classical left-wing one. They went there to to act against a neoliberal measure. But now there's also another question here, which I think is very important, because I agree to a certain extent, that Putin is the kind of top agent of the political change, okay, in terms of Russia. And that it's hardly possible without his consent, okay, to push through something radical or something major. I kind of agree with this, But on the other hand, we should not forget that Putin is not alone in this. Okay, there are many rivaling centers around Putin. One of them is Medvedev. Okay, and I think we should be able to kind of understand this contradiction that Medvedev, he's not anymore. Okay, so he was the prime minister of Russia. Russia is a presidential republic, so the president is more important. But this was a kind of symbolic manifestation of this rivalry. On the one hand, we had this neoliberal, pro-European, pro-Western camp led by, well, not led by, but kind of embodied in Medvedev, who has now been pushed a little bit to the back. Now he's got some kind of position in a national Security Council or something like that. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the institution. But by the way, it's important because Putin started off by being head of the same organization or same body, same entity in the past, like 20 years ago. So it's not like Putin can take any decision and everybody's going to follow. Okay, he's constantly in a conflict with some circles here and there. And of course, for us, it's very difficult to exactly know whom and where, because not all of them are represented politically in a manner that would be clear for us to consume. But it's definitely not like this. But people, for example, use in the West this cliche, which I hate, Putin's Russia. It's the other way around, okay? It's Russia's Putin, really. I mean, he's got a lot of support, and that's why he's in this position. And by consuming this support, he's able to control the oligarchs and to shield himself from most of the rivals who are also very powerful. He managed to crush some of them by extracting back, kind of getting much of the wealth that was exported, that was taken out of Russia, mostly to places like Cyprus, Great Britain, Luxembourg, and so on and so forth during the 90s. And of course, half of this wealth, probably, I don't know the statistic, but I believe what you just said or read somewhere, that half of this, well, not half of it, but the kind of the quantity of the wealth that is outside Russia is pretty much the same as the one inside Russia. But it used to be much, much worse. Okay, it was like Putin and his administration had to crush the oligarchs outside in order to make them return what they stole, okay, via the mechanism of direct foreign investments. And you will see that's very strange in the Russian statistics. Okay, when you look at the economy, that, for example, in the first 10 years of the current century, the biggest investments, direct foreign investments, were from Cyprus. Okay, that's kind of strange, but this is how it had to. This is how it was. Okay, so there are many problems, and I don't think anyone disagrees in Russia, outside Russia, Western media, Eastern media, whatever. Okay, this is just, there are many problems, and I don't know how are they going to overcome this. And there are many contradictions, but certainly, most certainly, Navalny is not going to play any role in it. Navalny is a guy who is pumped up by the West because he is just convenient for them for many reasons, and he can reproduce these cliches, okay, like about corruption. I'm so tired of it. Like every time I hear in the West about Bulgaria, it's corruption. Oh, give me a break. Okay, like as if it really matters that the politicians, top politicians, are corrupt. Like they are corrupt in France, they are corrupt in Belarus, they are corrupt in America. It's obvious to anyone.
Yeah, but it's a different thing. I just want to return to what you said before, because I consider this maybe the most serious problem Russia is experiencing right now. It's this ideological vacuum, because the conference I mentioned, it was something I really couldn't explain to myself when I saw it. It was a conference that was hosted by Russia Today, which were famous as the ideological fortress of Putin and so on. And the conference started with a very harsh critique against the power in Russia, without mentioning any names, though. Without mentioning Putin or whatever, but still, they said we have this crisis of power. There is a gap, and so on and so forth. And all this speech culminated in the thesis that what we need now, what Russia needs now, is a kind of a ideological laboratory. That is to say, we need to explore and develop, construct new strategies and new ideologies. That is what Russia needs, because, okay, Putin, someday he will either die or he will lose elections. I don't know if it is possible. Anyway, he will be over.
He will go away. So
yes, but it doesn't matter so much, because Putin is just a token from a certain point of view. And what happens then? I mean, Putin already developed a huge machine in his party, youth organizations. He has a huge resource. We can imagine the next Putin, another maybe a young, intelligent guy who is challenging, who will be, challenging the issues, economical and political issues in Russia and so on. A new face. But the problem is that there is an ideological gap or vacuum that Russia is experiencing. And the point of the speech I heard in that conference was, we need now the intelligentsia and the young generation to somehow develop some new ideology, because that is what we really lack. And then I move to another point, because you somehow underestimated the part Navalny is playing in Russia. I'm not a fan. I'm not a political or ideological fan of Navalny. I am a leftist person, so I cannot really support such kind of. But still, what he's doing now is something we have to explain, and it's really important to do it well, because when we have an autocracy, the way we have in Russia, imagine it's like, again, this chess analogy. You have the queen is the most powerful figure, and it controls almost the entire field. So you have a kind of a power that used to control almost the entire field of, public sphere politics and everything. But this is an important word, almost. It's the first word of the vocabulary of resistance, because there are always squares that are non-occupiable, that remain free. These are the starting points of resistance. And what Navalny is doing now, first he changed his strategy from this very hardline nationalist agenda towards corruption critique. You say that's not really serious, but I think it is, because imagine let's say the average Russians with their lives. Well, to reach those people, showing them the palace and all these things, it's something that strikes. It just produces an effect. And then the next things he did was, first, that he developed a network in the social media, putting things online on YouTube, and sometimes when the court banned certain information, that they put it even on Pornhub, so that people could still see it. And his third move, which I think is interesting, is that he's trying to build a political network in many towns and cities across Russia, trying to support politicians that are standing outside of Putin's, body. And well, all these maybe it not be so politically important or powerful, but it is a symbolic challenge. And I insist on this thesis because symbols and symbolic, power produces political events. And when I say events, I mean it in the term that Badiou understands, an event like a change or disruption of the order of truth. So that we reach a kind of event like this, we need symbolic resistance. We need symbolic figures. So maybe he's not the best political figure, but he is important as a player in this kind of game. Because without this symbolic resistance, there is no possibility of change. you cannot
say here, because we are moving right now to this individual Navalny. From what I've seen, even in 2011, the New York Times wrote about him because he had a very controversial perspective on some people protesting, and he said, well, they are not animals, we cannot squash them, well, let's just use a pistol or something like that. So extremist declarations. And from what you said, and I've read, he runs on a very almost xenophobic and radical agenda, nationalistic. So he is some kind of Putin on steroids. Those liberals in the West imagining that he is going to shout all of the sudden in Kremlin, queer revolution, are out of their minds. This is not their guy, actually. He is very conservative, and I would not say that he is the one that is going to be a feminist and pro minorities. And from what you said, this is my intuition was correct. But I think he's the perfect social media product, a product of the media and of the social media hype that is selling him. I mean, I saw a picture with him and his girlfriend, and he looked like a little puppy just wanting for the bad master to torture him. It was unbelievable. I mean, and people are buying into that because this is the social media, this is the game. And I think it's a very dangerous game, because while I agree with you that it is important to have this kind of pressure, because without pressure there is no possibility of change, we have to take into consideration that it is a dangerous kind of pressure, because you have actually not a political leader, or let us say a dangerous political leader in what he thinks, but very appealing in terms of what he looks like in the media. What do you say, Boyan? Do you agree that this is the case?
Yeah, of course he's dangerous, and of course he's a product of, well, he's not entirely a product, or not exclusively a product of the social media. He's also a product of the Yale University's leadership program that he attended years ago. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name of the program that he attended. But look, first, I want to say that I take an issue with you describing him as some kind of Putin on steroids. How can you actually compare Putin, who runs, a multi-ethnic and a multi-confessional society and supports with state funding building of mosques and integration of the of all ethnicities and cultures, and there are about 200 all across the country, with Alexei Navalny, who actually wants to destroy this model, and he's opposing Putin from the right. And it's not just these incidents when he called people from Chechnya cockroaches. It's not just when he said that Poland would be much better under Russian rule. It's not only this, it's just the general multi-ethnic, multi-confessional model that Russia is based on currently, right now, under Putin, that he is challenging. He hates that. And he started out as what is now referred to nationalist blogger. Now, who's a blogger? A blogger is someone who wants to be very outspoken about something, but is not welcome anywhere in the serious platforms because he probably doesn't have many interesting things to say. So he was just running his mouth in the internet in a language and a manner that I just described for years, until he finally got trained by the Americans, who thought that he's going to be, a convenient tool. And he became one, all right? So now, of course, like in all throughout Eastern Europe, this is like corruption is the thing. And look, I'm not underestimating the question of the pressure that has to be there in order for a change to occur, or even, to think about it more philosophically, for theories of change to occur, somehow. Because without that, without any challenges, without any kind of embodiment of the contradictions of the system, it's going to be very difficult to see any changes. There could be some evolution that you could count on, maybe. So I agree with this. But, I take an issue with, statements like Navalny poses that challenge. Navalny poses no challenge at all, and I think he is the worst kind of opposition because the power knows, and Putin knows, and people around him, and his administration, and the top politicians of Unitary Russia, which is the Putin's party in Duma, they know that he poses no challenge, and he is a convenient leverage for them to, focus on the state, okay, and to make the state and the statehood, to turn it into some kind of ritualistic cult. Okay, the state, because and in this sense, okay, what he's doing is he's helping them to facilitate the kind of mental political process around the 90s. So he's not dragging anything forward. He's just, he's just in the way. That's it. And the protests, look, of course there were protests, and I'm not denying this, but let's have a proportion, okay? The fact that it's been headlined in the Western media for the last, 10 days or something like that doesn't really prove anything in terms of how things happen on the ground, and what and whether it's in any way significant part of the internal political process in Russia. Now, according to the statistics I've read, there were some, Navalny said that there were some 45,000 people on the protest in Moscow, I think. 45,000 people. That's a gross overestimation. And there are some elements close to the power, like Izvestia, who said that it was like, I think, 5,000 or 7,000 people, something like that, which is an underestimation, obviously. And there is this statistic that you can get from Kommersant, which is a paper which is rather critical of the current administration, but is not wildly, against Putin, like Echa Moskvy or something like this. And they came up with a figure of about 17 to 20,000, which I think is, which I think is fair. Now, this figure, 20,000, is pretty much an average figure for any protest you can imagine, or not you can imagine, but that's been recorded over the last 10 or 15 years. Okay, and also the quality of this protest in terms of its political postulates. What were they? I mean, what was this protest supposed to achieve? And what happened prior to these protests is also very important, because I think it reveals a lot about how things really are, and what is Navalny's quality in terms of his presence in Russian politics, if there is any, considering the fact that he has been running around 2% for the last, I don't know how many years now. Okay, I think in 2018, when Putin was when he was prevented from actually taking part in the presidential elections because he was a convicted felon by the time. Okay. So it was, I think, 3% or maybe 4%, and that was his best. He was prevented to run, but he still appeared in some polls. Okay, like what would be his support then? Now it's like in Moscow. Okay, 10 years ago or something like that, he might have gotten like 20%, or yeah, that's not out of question. But here it's like, Moscow is also a specific place in comparison to the rest of Russia. Now, he was allegedly poisoned. Okay, that's the story now, that he was allegedly poisoned. Like the Kremlin tried to kill him, but wasn't able to. And it's like, it's apparent that I just don't understand how it goes. Like, Kremlin tries to kill someone like every half a year or something, at least according to the Western media, and never manages. And never manages, right? It just doesn't work. So on one hand, you have this evil Putin that controls everything and even chooses the American president, right? In 2016, Donald Trump, according to Western media. So on the one hand, it's this powerful figure that can move the pawns all around the chessboard and stuff like that. But on the other hand, he can't even kill an opposition leader effectively, who runs about around 2%. So like, I don't see a reason for repressing him in any major way. Now, so he was poisoned. So he was allegedly poisoned. He was examined, okay, and the Russian medical authorities, the doctors there, said no poisoning, but he does have some medical conditions that require quite an acute treatment. And then, he flew to Germany, where it was suddenly established that, yeah, totally, he was poisoned. And the media ran with it. And then the Russian authorities, what they did, said, okay, if you have some evidence of poisoning, how about you hand it over to us so that we can start our own investigation? And they said, no, we're not going to give it to you. We're going to give it to the OPCW, which is like a complete madness. Okay, so they gave it to the OPCW, and then the Russians were supposed to go to the OPCW in order for them to get evidence on how they allegedly poisoned Alexei Navalny, which is like a complete madness. Now, another question is, Alexei Navalny went to Germany, and in what, 30 days, about 1 month, he was already up and running. Okay, he was totally healthy after being poisoned with Novichok. Okay, Novichok. I don't know whether you're familiar with the kind of effects Novichok could have. Like, it's supposed to be the deadliest nerve agent in the world, 10 times stronger than VX, and so on and so forth. And then, apparently, it's somehow, the immune system of Alexei Navalny was able to combat this. I don't know how, but anyway, it happened. And now, after it was established that the evil Russian authorities tried to kill him, he decided he's going to go back home, okay? Which is rather strange decision, okay, for someone who was just a kind of supposedly a victim of an assassination. But anyway, he goes home, and prior to his going home, he was warned, okay? It was all over social media, like the Russian authorities were crying about it. Look, if he comes back, it's because he is in violation of his parole, he's going to be arrested. And he was warned, his lawyers were warned, everybody knew that. And he went there, he got arrested, and then they called for these protests. So if you see any other sense in this than just trying to destabilize Russia, then I don't know what it could be, really. So that's why I'm saying Alexei Navalny is not going to is not going to have any good effect on Russian politics. And I definitely agree that there has to be, organization, leadership, and ideology, most of all, that people could organize around. And of course, as a leftist, I stand for classical, socialist ideology. I think it could still gain a lot of ground in Russia. And, I think it could even challenge the political system in general. Now, whether it's going to be facilitated through the Communist Party of the Russian Federation or through Spravedlivaya Rossiya, which is another party, like a Social Democratic Party, okay, which is also represented parliamentary. So I don't know about this, but this is, of course, my offer. Like this is something that I would have liked. I would like to see happening in Russia. This kind of thing, and I don't have.
You're going to see, Boyan, unfortunately, because I think in order for somebody, this is what I wonder. In order for somebody to have such courage, after he's been poisoned, to go back there, it is pretty obvious that he relies either on money that he has, either on a pretty good informal network, either on external support. I mean, I don't like the fact that right now Russia today is starting to play the game that CNN played, like the Americans are to be blamed because they brought us Trump. Now they say the Russians are to be blamed because they brought us Trump. Now the Russians at Russia today say, well, the Americans are to be blamed because they brought us Navalny. I don't like this type of game.
I think there are two very simplistic narratives trying to explain Russia, and we have to confront them both. One of these narratives is, let's say, these Western liberal, whatever, trying to say, Putin is evil, and then you have this, people like Navalny representing Western democratic ideals, etc., which is total bullshit. It's very simplistic, and it's not much reality. The other way around is also a very simplistic narrative, telling us, Putin is a very successful leader and politician, and then Navalny is just a figure produced by Western media in order to destabilize Russia. And I understand such kind of a position, but I think it's a very simplistic as well, because There are two things we have to keep in mind as well, because you mentioned Putin is running a huge country which is multicultural and multi-religious and ethnical and so on. But how is he running this country? Is he running it successfully? Yes, he had some periods that he managed to overcome certain problems. As I said in the beginning, these were the problems of the 90s, dealing with the oligarchy and so on. But in today's Russia, you have a huge inequality.
Yeah, that's true.
Inequality which became a norm. And because you speak about multi-ethnical society, let's not forget the status of the Asian people in Russia. They are the second-hand people. They are the people that are engaged in, kind of jobs that are really in the bottom, and they don't have access to higher offices and so on, and it's a huge problem, and you can see it. I mean, empirically with your eyes, if you go there. I mean, one thing is running this country, other thing is how do you run it, and then I don't agree that using social media platforms is just some kind of candy politics. Navalny is the nice guy with Julia next to him, and I understand it. It's a perfume and roses, but it's not just that. Because, as I mentioned, if you live in a country like Russia with such a strong state and strong power, you need resources, you need channels, you need spaces that allow you to act. And of course, Navalny started as a blogger. That's how he became popular in Russia. That's how his career started. And of course, that's what his strength is, using social media. And we don't have to underestimate this, because in a country where we have pressure, political pressure on media and on public imagination, and we have this specific Russian situation, it's very important that you utilize channels, or you utilize media and public spaces that can be points of resistance. And of course, it has its dangers, because all these new media are also what I call producing the so-called flattening of the world. They make the world flat in terms, they simplify everything, they put everything in this fairy tale categories, good and evil. Putin is the evil master, and Navalny is the nice guy, superhero and things like that. So we have to be very careful with this kind of imagery, because what the new media is doing is precisely that. But this is a legitimate starting point of resistance. This is a very legitimate starting point of resistance. And as I repeat it again, I don't like Navalny as a political, a person. I don't believe that he has the political resource to beat Putin or to challenge him, as I said in the beginning. But I do believe that he is able producing a symbolic challenge. And this is also a starting point. It's like the same situation that we have in Bulgaria. It's kind of a, there is nothing to do. Because the government is corrupt, is bad, is already for since 2009 is in power. So what do we do? But there is no other political agent able to challenge the ruling party in Bulgaria. Only maybe to some extent the Socialist Party, which is not a socialist party for some time. They turned into a conservative, traditionalist, right-wing party, kind of like AfD in Germany. So it's not a socialist party anymore. So you don't have a political agenda that could challenge the status quo in Bulgaria. You don't have that in Russia, and I've I've said that many times in interviews when people ask me what do I think about the politics in Russia and why Putin is so strong. And I say, well, because there is no one else able to really challenge him.
I would say just a quick thought here, Boyan, because I'll let you intervene in a moment. I would like to thank Lidiana Popescu and Yuris Muter for their comments. And they are tackling a very important issue that I want us to finish with, and that is inequality. And I tell you in a minute, what do I think about the whole story? Of course, I may be very naive since I told you I've seen the Russia and the Russian political landscape through the lenses of the Western media. Now, the problem with this palace, I don't care if Putin has it or not. I don't think this is the problem here. The problem, I think, is inequality and the fact that that palace exists while 20 million Russians are living below the poverty line. This is the main problem from my perspective here. And the Western media is not tackling that. They just want to extract Putin from the palace and put Navalny in the palace. You know, a very simplistic solution to a very complex situation. And they only explain the palace, the luxurious palace, through corruption. And I think it should be also explained through capitalism and inequality. And the inequality that this system, this very economic system produces, you know, and the fact that corruption has a deeper cause, and that is inequality. And this, I think, should be the final, you know, part of our analysis.
Sure. It's in fact, these are inefficient policies. What you're talking about, the existence of these inequalities in Russia means that the people in power are not able to deal with the situation. But let me just mention it for the last time, because Boyan dwelled on that. You know, the problem with poisonings. It's not just Navalny being poisoned. I'm not a specialist in poisons or in poisoning. Maybe you understand it better. But the fact is, in the last years, there's a huge list of people in Russia who had a cup of tea, and some of them, you know, didn't make it. Others somehow stayed alive. And you know how many people were poisoned by tea drinking in Russia? No. And do you consider this? I mean, like a normal situation? All these people were in some way opposing the power in Russia. Some of them were journalists. Other were, you know, some kind of, you know, public speakers or politicians. But this is a kind of Renaissance, you know, Renaissance story, with these poisonings all the time. And I don't want to underestimate and not say this is a mythology, you know, just to make a hero out of Navalny. No, he's not the only one who was poisoned. This is obviously a kind of a strategy applied to the enemies. And of course, Kremlin will deny that it will stand behind such an attacks. But it's not just a singular problem or some you know particular things. It is a systemic problem.
I would not like to go there because we have no proof, and we are going into some sort of this type of novel and stories, and we have
no, but there are proofs. There are proofs about that. There was even this agent who spoke out, you know, saying.
I think we should. May we live enough in our 80s when they allow the public to see. This is when we are going to see what really happened and who was behind it. I mean, we are entering this gray zone that I find I feel very unstable. And this is why I wanted, I do not deny what you're saying, but I feel very vulnerable from the point of view of not being able to say anything about it.
Because yes, but it's not a serious position just to deny by saying, you know, but we don't really know. We don't have a real proof. it's not a serious stance on the problem.
You need evidence, material evidence, in order to make such assertions. Now, so far, from what I know, of course, I don't know about the number of poisonings in Russia. I don't know if there are 10 or 20 or I don't know how many, and whether it was via a cup of tea or via a cup of coffee. And
but were there so many? I mean, like 10 or 20?
Is there criminal activity in Russia involving homicide? Of course. And is it happening through, a poisoned cup of tea or poisoned cup of coffee? Probably some of it, yes. Now, if there is evidence that there is a systemic extermination of Putin's enemies via poisoning, then it's a completely different story. I don't think we have that
Maybe
evidence.
It's just a coincidence. Maybe it's just a coincidence.
Maybe it's a coincidence. I don't know about that. But what I want to say is that for sure, according to logic and rationality, which are two things I kind of like when I can try to cognitively explain the reality around myself, is that there is no point whatsoever in Putin running in polls at 60 or 70%, poisoning someone, so doing the one thing that is going to destroy his PR internationally, doing this one thing to a guy who's polling around 1 or 2%. There's no logic in it. Okay, so
yes, but the problem is not always about logic. It's not always about logic.
I don't think he's stupid, so I don't think he would have done that.
Stupid.
Guys,
but the thing is, it's not always about logic. Logic is not the only engine of political life and political struggle. If it were like that, then we would be able in a Hegelian way to explain everything very simple. But it's not, and I don't believe in coincidence.
Well, look, I don't want us to go there.
Even though the lack of personality on the part of the president of the Russian Federation. I mean, this is.
It is not that I do not believe, these stories. Of course, they are horrible. But at some point, I thought to myself that it is the worst thing that can happen is for you to contest Putin, because that you would have to fear its rivals and also other secret services that might want to poison you just to put the blame on him. I mean, the one thing I would like to say here is that, interestingly enough, Putin managed, I think, to build the first dictatorship of the secret services, and he relies on a very powerful network of these people, from what I've heard. But when you enter this, there's no way out. I mean, you can rely on logic and think, look how crazy he must have been just to, to try to poison somebody who runs at 2%. At the other hand, you might think, well, he has a modus operandi because he relies on this network of secret operatives, secret services operatives, and this is their way of solving things in a very primitive and brutal way. But as I told you, I don't like to discuss this because I feel it is leading nowhere, and we are missing the elephant in the room, and that is the 20 million people that are living below poverty line, and we owe them at least that. I mean, we owe them a serious debate on the palace in existence, and the fact that the simple solution is not just to replace the inhabitant of the palace, but to really put this problem into context of the inequality and what creates it.
Look, the context of inequality is the context of capitalism, which is also present in Russia. Now, whether you want to overcome or not capitalism is, of course, a matter of your individual or collective political choice. And of course, my agenda is clear for this. I'm like a classical socialist, democratic Marxist. So, I can give you a long list of demands now. And of course, now the question is whether they're realizable in Russia at the moment or not. But anyway, I feel there are forces in Russia, including left forces, and, in Russia, Todor said that there's a lot of control on the communication channels and stuff like that. I don't know, probably there's a lot of control. Like personally, I have never experienced that, and I also see a lot of outlets, left-wing outlets in Russia, and there are a lot of left-wing organizations, and not only outside the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which of course you can have all kinds of reservations about. But there is the Levy Front, for example, and it's an organization, the leader of which has been repressed multiple times, but still they have their papers, they have their websites, they have their Telegram channels, and all the rest of it. So. I mean, if you want to look for people with our political profile, and I assume the three of us political profile is relatively similar, then you can find people like yourself, like ourselves in Russia. You can affiliate there and you can act. Okay. And of course, you have to, as in every country, in Poland or in Bulgaria or in France, where the repression has been horrendous for the last 2 years, you have to, sort of bear in mind that you might be challenged also in this repressive manner by the armed bodies of men, to use Marx's language. So this is the situation from the point of view of the possibilities, in my opinion, to form political organizations. They're not banned. They are, and it's not like in any way they are made illegal. It's just, this social media. Okay, look, I understand that it's important for young people, and that there's what we even call them Instagram generation. Now, honestly, I cannot be convinced probably that this is meaningful in any way. For me, all this, TikTok revolutions and stuff like that, this is just politically lumpenized stuff. I mean, I just completely, totally reject it. And maybe I'm wrong, okay? Maybe the future says, Boyan, look, I mean, people organized through TikTok and, took down the government of Russia, America, or China or something like that. I don't believe it's ever going to happen, but maybe I just kind of dismiss it. But, on the question of inequalities, obviously, I want to say Russia is one of the grossly unequal countries in the world, okay? And this has to be dealt with. Now, on the question of people from the West, sort of, you, Maria, said it, like, they don't really address this problem. They want to take out Putin from the palace, put Navalny in there in order to have, like, a political agent that is going to sort of realize their interests from a position of power in Russia. Now, look, actually, they sometimes, occasionally, very occasionally, addressed this problem. Do you know how? Laughing at it. Like, for example, Putin, pretty much every year since 2015, 2016, was stressing in his public appearances, the most important ones, okay? He was stressing that there's a major problem with, and look, I don't want to come across as some kind of defendant of Putin, okay? I'm not, like, he doesn't need me as to defend him. He can defend himself. I don't really care. I mean, I don't have any particular sentiment for Putin. But, he repeatedly said that there is a problem with poverty in Russia, and he insists that everybody focuses on that and does something about it. And they even had a program designed in 2017, if I remember correctly, to cut poverty in half by 2024 or 2025. Okay? And, every time this was mentioned, okay, this idea that Putin put forward was mentioned in the Western media, then the commentators all around would just laugh at it. Oh, like, look, populist leader, he wants to reduce poverty. That was the attitude, okay? So it's not only that they don't care, the Western media or the Western establishment, about the poverty in Russia. They would have loved to see it increased because they want to see weak Russia, controllable Russia. And this is why Putin is so much in the way. And this is why they despise him so much. Not so much because they don't like his political profile or, his kind of, attitude to certain groups and stuff like that. No, it's totally not because of that. It's because he actually took the liberty to challenge them and to say that Russia is no longer going to be controlled or subordinate or is never going to succumb anymore to this, liberal democratic, mythology that the West uses as an ideological leverage to control pretty much the entire world or to, impose all kinds of ideas on that they have. And this is the major problem here. That's why they hate him so much. And I think, also the comparisons with Bulgaria are not fair because, in Bulgaria, we do have a government that doesn't have an alternative. And I totally agree with this. And it's a major political problem. But this government has brought upon the Bulgarian people for the last 15 years, I think, or 10 years at least, that Boyko Borisov was effectively in power, nothing but destruction. There was nothing else. It was only further devastation. Nothing happened in Bulgaria that could be even remotely described as positive. Whereas in Russia, it's not the case. They've actually, regained control of their own state. And we're not only a colonial power. I mean, not power. Sorry, we're not only a colonial state, but we also have a gang of oligarchs at the top of the state's institutions that have exploited the country and the society to an extent that there is nothing more to loot. Almost. That's why there's so much. There are so many quarrels about EU funding in Bulgaria, because it's going to end at a certain point, like it ended in Poland. And now there's this big question: where are we gonna steal from? So it's not the same thing, in my opinion. And again, I just want to stress on that. I really have no political sentiment for Vladimir Putin, but I want us to look at him and try to power in Russia in a way which is honest, okay, intellectually and politically.
Yes, it is difficult, because the moment you start to say some good things, about Russia, the moment you are blamed and you are smeared, and this is the way it goes. Now, the problem here is that I do not think we should end this conversation without giving Todor the opportunity to address this particular problem, because had it not been Putin, or had it not been, the problem, the deepest problem, I think, is inequality, and the fact that they have a flat tax, they are not having progressive taxation, they are not, he seems so powerful in, politically, in poisoning his opponents, but when it comes to progressive taxations, his powers evaporate. And I find this to be very troubling, don't you?
I think we have to very carefully inspect the mythology surrounding Putin, because I understand it pretty well, and it's that after especially after Yeltsin, after 90s Russia, that was in the hands of the oligarchs, and you had a president who was pretty drunk all the time and was a puppet and so on. Putin's role was really important in two ways. First, it was that he restored the feeling of dignity for the Russians, as he opposed, this pressure coming from the West to impose certain, policies and strategies on Russia. So he restored Russia as a superpower, and on the other hand, he successfully dealt with the domestic crisis in Russia, so that really the living standard went higher, and the economy was uplifted. But the mythology surrounding Putin in these both ways, that he's challenging the Western hegemony, and especially the politics of the capitalist, let's say, the corporations in the United States trying to dominate the politics of other countries. So Russia kind of stood up and said, we don't play this game. We are on our own. We have our own agenda. We have our own Russian way of doing things. This was basically what Putin did. But this was a mythology that was possible in the end of the 90s, or the beginning of the century. And that's why I call it a mythology, because it describes something that happened in the past. It describes how Putin became Putin, if I might express it this way. But today, it's pretty different. Many things changed. When I say that there is a control in Russia, it's not that kind of control that people are not able to talk about anything or so on. No, I've experienced that, especially that's why I gave this example with the conference hosted by Russia today, where you had this, speech against power and so on. And if you watch Russian television, you may see very often these studios with people quarreling on all kinds of topics. So obviously, it's not that kind of oppression of public language. But still, the problem is what you have in reality today. And this is extreme inequality. People, especially younger people. When I say younger people, I don't mean just the TikTok generation, teenagers or something like that. I mean the people who were young, like our generation, maybe the people between, let's say, 20 and 40 something. So this is already a huge part of Russian population, especially urban and middle class. I mean, Putin's success produced this mythology about him, but then we have the problems of inequality. We have people disapproving of or kind of, I don't know, I'm looking for the right word, just unaccepting what Putin is. They just deny the legitimacy of this mythology today, and that's a fundamental problem. And the problem of present day media politics, or what you might call political entertainment or post politics, is that basically truth doesn't matter. If something becomes a fact in media, or becomes starts circling around, it's already an impact. It already produces an impact. That's why also this film made this kind of impact. It doesn't matter who is running, who is possessing. The fact that there is something like that is already a pretty compromising. So I think the mythology surrounding Putin is one thing, and I agree with Boyan about that, about what he did in the past, and his role in the survival of Russia, but in the survival of Russian state and economy and so on. This is true, but I think today Putin is already kind of starting to lose control, and inevitably this will produce a gap and crisis, and that makes it possible for people like Navalny to appear and have a kind of an impact. It doesn't matter if it's Navalny or it's someone else. Maybe there will be other figures that will emerge on the public stage. I hope so, because diversifying the political stage is a very important step in just developing political life in Russia. I mean, it's like some people in Bulgaria are having this kind of thoughts, as if we are living encapsulated in the 90s. But the 90s are over, dear friends. I mean, the problems of the 90s are still, formatting our present day imagination. And this is pretty problematic. This is also the problem of this, as we call it, cave anti-communism that we experience. People still think in the categories of the 90s. They are afraid of the communists, the Russians, and so on. And it doesn't work like that. And if you try to utilize this mythology, Putin's mythology from the end of the 90s, it just doesn't work anymore. And it gives opportunity to other agents to challenge his status today. So what I think remains to be solved in the future is how will Putin himself deal with this situation. I don't believe that violence or just shutting down your opponent is a legitimate way of doing or of coping, with problems. I just don't support this kind of politics. Don't believe in it. And I have some hesitation concerning Putin's ability to deal efficiently, or it's a problem of every dictator. At some point, they just lose the right perception of the perception of reality, or the perception of themselves. And usually, this is a key, the crucial problem. When you stop being able to see what's really going on, where's the real problem, and why is this happening like it's happening? And I think being in power for so long, just this on its own, the fact that you're being in power for like 20, more than 20 years, makes you live in a different world. And I think Putin will be in serious problem. The big question is whether he will make a move to try to bring a different player his own production, so to speak. Another Medvedev, or I don't know, some nice guy from the factory of his of his gang, or it will be possible that he will be challenged by another political force, which at the time being I don't see as a possibility.
Well,
I just want to make one very short remark, and it's very important for me to say that. Like, I take an issue with you, both of you actually, calling Vladimir Putin a dictator, because I don't think he's a dictator. He's a legitimate leader of the Russian nation, elected multiple times so far. Okay, in fair elections, which has been, no one challenged the legitimacy of the elections.
Yeah, but it's kind of there. I mean, I don't think dictator would have been the right name. I don't remember calling him that, but I was just a child when he came to power. And I certainly don't think it is okay for somebody to go out of power when I retire. So
yeah, okay.
Totally. Okay. I mean, come on.
So also, I want to say one important thing, which I guess matters not only politically but even philosophically, if you like, because you said it multiple times, by the way, Todor, that it's going to be a problem for Putin to reproduce the mechanism that he has created. Actually, I don't think it's going to be a problem for Putin. There aren't going to be many problems for Putin, really, because once he feels like he can't carry this thing anymore, he will just retire. He will go. He's one of the wealthiest men in the world.
I don't think he will.
I don't think he wants to retire. I think if he retires, maybe he will face some, let's say, judicial problems. I
don't think so. But anyway, like, once he is off power, I don't think there's going to be any problem for him in any respect. What's going to be problematic, if there is no way developed for Russia to go further, then it's going to be a major problem for the Russian society, for the Russian elites, for everyone. This is going to be a problem for everyone, but not for Putin himself, because Putin himself, like, again, regardless of whether you like him or you don't like him, his political views and whether he's corrupt or not, he definitely has acquired a lot of wealth, a lot of influence, and he is an intelligence officer. Okay, so he knows how to defend himself and
sure, but the fate of dictators is always very similar.
States so much in power, there is no way. I think this is the problem. That
you want to bet he's going to die in power? I mean, is that what you're trying to do? Like, I can bet. Like, we can take bets. I don't think he's going to die in power.
I don't say he's going to die in power, but I believe because he built a huge machine and having the experience with Secret Service and everything, but I don't believe it will be that easy for him to go out of power and just sit in on his couch and enjoy his money and his wealth. Because the fate of dictators don't matter, no matter where, if they live in the Middle East or in Belarus or whatever. It is always the same. When you lose the levers of power, when you lose the tools and resources of power, so let's say Putin retreats, no matter in what way, I think it will be difficult for him surviving in terms that if the next person coming to power is not his own image, let's say, or his own production. He will face some tough time, I believe. He will be prosecuted, and he will be dealt very hard with.
Maybe that's okay, but otherwise, I don't think he's going to be punished criminally for anything, least for the role that he played in the recent Russian history. But look, I don't want to, I don't want to argue over this. I just said that I'm kind of, uncomfortable with, with the way. With the kind of presentation of Putin as a dictator, because I think it strips him of the legitimacy that he obviously does.
I understand, but that's what he is. I mean, that's what he is. He played. I mean, okay, let's. He played a very important role in the history of Russia. in reestablishing, also in foreign politics, but also domestically, as we mentioned already. But that's what he is. He is a dictator, and that's the truth. And we must admit it.
Okay, he is an elected dictator then, multiple times. Okay, like so. This is the problem. A dictator, it's like a working democratic mechanism that has put him in the place where he is right now.
Sure, but he lost this democratic mechanism long time ago. There was rigging of the elections, if you remember. There were rigging of the elections that came out publicly. You can't stay in power for 22 years by using democratic mechanisms. It's not possible.
What are you talking about?
No, the problem is deeper, Boyan. I think the problem is, look what happens to Bolsonaro. I mean, the way he handled the pandemic is disastrous, okay? But he polls and people would still elect him. This is the problem. But once you stay in power for too long, you get so powerful. Just a moment. Just let me finish my thought here. Of course, this is the kind of political leader the current global elites produced. A kind of leader that gives the appearance of a democratic process and manages to win the elections, but at the same time, he stays there like for 20 years. So from the point of view of legitimate elections, of course, he won the elections. But from the point of view of staying there for 20 years, he is a dictator. Okay?
No, guys, I mean, you are now taking
there for elections. Okay. Well, guys, we've been talking for almost 2 hours now. Let us start a debate here. And we are definitely going to go back to this, because I think it was the most spirited debate that we ever had here, in terms of us not being on the same page. And I think it was interesting. And for me, it was very, very, how should I say, informative in the first place, and at the same time liberating, because it was the first time that I haven't heard people just repeating cliches and repeating stereotypes and just wanting to, virtue signal themselves, like, oh, I'm not, a supporter of Russia. Look at me, how nice and democratic I am. And we even had this quarrel about Putin being a dictator or not. And we have to come back to this. If Todor agrees, maybe in 3 weeks or 1 month time, we should come back. I would also like to thank Yuri Smuter, that is also following us and had a lot of comments on what we discussed here, and some other viewers that commented on our show. Thank you both very much for being here today, and we definitely have to come back to this. Thank you.